In 1914, the Russian Empire sent 15 million men to fight in a war most of them didn't understand, against enemies most of them couldn't name, for reasons most of them would never know. Nearly 2 million would die. Almost 3.5 million would rot in enemy prison camps, and in the end, the empire that sent them would cease to exist entirely. Tonight, we follow one of those 15 million, a peasant farmer named Mikhail, and this is what the Great War looked like through Russian eyes. So before we get into this, if you're the kind of person who falls asleep to these stories, do me a favour and hit subscribe. I'm always curious where everybody's listening from, so drop your city and the time in the comments. It's wild to me that someone in Manchester might be hearing this at 2 a.m, while somebody else in Los Angeles is just getting into bed. Anyway, let's go. All right, we're heading back to August 1914. But hold on. Get comfortable first. Fix your pillow if you need to. Pull up that blanket. 'Cause where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. Picture a village. Not much of a village, really. 30, maybe 40 wooden houses with thatched roofs spread along a muddy track that some optimists once called a road. The village of Kamenka sits about 40 versts east of Saratov, which means absolutely nothing unless you know that Saratov is itself in the middle of nowhere, 1,000 miles from anywhere that matters, deep in the Russian heartland where the Volga River cuts through endless wheat fields that stretch to the horizon in every direction you look. It's just after 4 a.m. on July 31st. Mikhail Volkov is 24 years old. He's been awake for an hour already because that's when farmers wake up, and he's been a farmer his entire life, and his father was a farmer, and his father's father was a farmer, going back as far as anyone in the family can remember. The Volkovs work the land. That's what they do. That's what they've always done. Right now, Mikhail is standing in the doorway of his family's izba, the traditional wooden house that his grandfather built with his own hands. He's watching the first grey light of dawn creep across the wheat fields while drinking something that's technically called tea, but tastes more like hot brown water, with a memory of leaves somewhere in its distant past. His wife Katya is still sleeping. Their son Pyotr, who just turned 3 last month, is curled up next to her. It's a good morning. Quiet. The kind of morning where you can hear the birds wake up one by one, and then the sound of hoofbeats on the main road. Mikhail doesn't think much of it at first. Horses use the road. That's what roads are for. But these hoofbeats are moving fast. Faster than anyone usually moves around here. There's no reason to move fast around here. Everything happens when it happens. The wheat grows when it grows. The rain falls when it falls. Time moves differently in places like Kamenka. The hoofbeats get louder, and then Mikhail sees him. A young man on a grey horse, maybe 17 or 18 years old, riding hard down the main track. There's something red trailing behind him, flapping in the wind, and it takes Mikhail a moment to realise it's a flag. A red flag. The young man is shouting something, one word, over and over. War, 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 war. Doors start opening up and down the village. Men stumble out, still pulling on shirts. Women appear in doorways, hands pressed to their mouths. Children peer out from behind their mothers' legs. The young man on the horse keeps riding, keeps shouting, disappears down the road toward the next village, and his voice fades, but the word doesn't fade. It hangs in the air like smoke after a fire. War. Mikhail's father appears beside him. The old man is 62 years old, and he's seen a lot of things, including the war against the Japanese 10 years ago, though he didn't have to fight in that one because he was already too old. He puts his hand on Mikhail's shoulder and says nothing. There's nothing to say. They both know what's coming. By noon, The village elder has received the official telegram from Saratov. All men between 18 and 43 are to report to the district induction centre in Petrovsk within 3 days. Bring your own food for the journey. Families of mobilised soldiers will receive an allowance. Report to the church first for blessing, then to the train station. Nobody knows who they're fighting. That's the strange part. The telegram says war, but it doesn't say against whom. The old men gather in the village square and argue about it. Some say it's the Germans, some say the Austrians. A few of the older men remember the war with Japan and say, maybe it's the Japanese again, come back for another round. One man insists it must be the English because the English are always causing trouble somewhere. Nobody really knows. Mikhail goes home and tells Katya. She doesn't cry. Not yet. She just looks at him with those grey eyes that he fell in love with 6 years ago when she was the prettiest girl in the next village over, and she says, "How long?" He doesn't know. "Will you come back?" He doesn't know that either. What about the harvest? That one he has an answer for. His younger brother Sergei is only 16, too young for the draft. Sergei and their father will handle the harvest. The women will help. They'll manage. Somehow, they'll manage. They always manage. The next 2 days pass in a blur. There's a feast the night before he leaves. Not much of a feast by city standards, but for Kamenka it's practically a banquet. Potatoes and black bread and salted fish, and a pig that the village elder sacrifices for the occasion. The village can't really afford to sacrifice a pig, but this is tradition. You send your men off to war properly. You give them something to remember. There's vodka too. Lots of vodka. The men drink too much and sing songs that start out cheerful and end up sad, the way all Russian songs do eventually. Mikhail's father gives a toast about honour and duty and protecting the motherland, and his voice cracks at the end. And nobody mentions it because that would be embarrassing for everyone. Katya gives Mikhail a small icon of St. Nicholas that belonged to her grandmother. She sews it into the lining of his coat so it will be close to his heart. She makes him promise to say a prayer every night. She makes him promise to write. She makes him promise to come home. He promises all of it. Little Pyotr doesn't understand what's happening. He's 3. How could he understand? He just knows that Papa is leaving and Mama is sad and everyone keeps hugging him too tight. He gives Mikhail a drawing he made, a scribble of coloured marks that's supposedly a picture of their horse, though it looks more like a brown cloud. Mikhail folds it carefully and puts it in his pocket next to his heart, right above where the icon is sewn into his coat. The morning of departure comes too fast. 14 men from Kamenka are leaving for the war, 14 out of a village of 200. That's a lot of hands gone from the fields right before harvest season, but nobody complains, at least not out loud. This is duty. This is what you do when the Tsar calls. They walk to Petrovsk. It takes most of the day. The road is terrible and the dust coats everything, and by the time they arrive, Mikhail's throat is so dry he can barely swallow. The induction centre is chaos. Pure, absolute chaos. Thousands of men from dozens of villages, all crammed into a space meant for maybe a few hundred. There aren't enough clerks to process everyone. There aren't enough doctors to examine everyone. There aren't enough supplies for everyone. Mikhail waits in line for 6 hours. When he finally reaches the front, a tired clerk takes his name and his village and his age, and hands him a slip of paper that says he's now a soldier in the 226th Infantry Regiment of the Imperial Russian Army. That's it. No uniform yet. No rifle. No training. Just a piece of paper that says his life no longer belongs to him. The train to the front takes 4 days. 4 days in a cattle car with 40 other men, sleeping on straw, eating whatever food they brought from home, stopping at stations where local women hand out bread and water and sometimes chai. Nobody knows where they're going. The officers don't tell them anything, and maybe the officers don't know either. Mikhail makes friends with a man named Pavel from a village about 50 versts from Kamenka. Pavel is 28 years old and has a wife and 4 children, and he's terrified, though he tries not to show it. They share food. They share stories about home. They share the long, uncomfortable silences when there's nothing left to say. The train crosses into what used to be Poland. The landscape changes. The villages look different. The people speak differently. Mikhail has never been more than 30 versts from Kamenka in his entire life, and now he's hundreds of miles from home, in a place where the signs are in languages he can't read, surrounded by men he doesn't know, heading toward a war he doesn't understand. They finally arrive at a depot behind the lines and receive their equipment. Sort of. Mikhail gets a uniform. It doesn't fit. The pants are too short and the coat is too big and the boots are made for someone with much smaller feet. But at least it's a uniform. He looks like a soldier now, even if he doesn't feel like one. But there's no rifle. The sergeant explains that there aren't enough rifles to go around. Some men will get them, others will have to wait. When a man with a rifle falls, another man picks it up. That's how it works. The war hasn't even started for Mikhail, and already he's learning the first lesson of the Russian army. There's never enough. 3 weeks of training follow, or what passes for training. They march, they dig trenches, they practice bayonet charges with wooden sticks because they still don't have enough rifles. They learn to identify German uniforms, Austrian uniforms, and how to tell the difference between enemy artillery and friendly artillery, though in practice it all sounds like the end of the world. An older soldier named Dmitri takes Mikhail under his wing. Dmitri is maybe 40 years old, with a face like cracked leather and eyes that have seen things he doesn't talk about. He fought in the war against Japan 10 years ago. He knows what's coming. Stay low, Dmitri tells him. Keep your head down. Don't volunteer for anything. Don't trust anyone who seems too eager. And when the shooting starts, find a hole and stay in it until someone tells you different. August 20th, 1914. The regiment moves up to the front lines near a place called Gumbinnen in East Prussia. Mikhail has a rifle now. He took it from a man named Yuri who caught a piece of shrapnel in the throat during the approach march. He didn't know Yuri. They never spoke. But he has his rifle now, and his ammunition pouch, and his bayonet. He's a real soldier. The German lines are maybe 500 meters away, across a stretch of farmland that looks remarkably like the farmland back home. Same wheat, same gentle hills, same sky overhead. It's strange to think that people are going to die here, in a place that looks so much like everywhere else. The order comes to advance. Mikhail's hands are shaking, his whole body is shaking. He looks at Pavel, who's shaking too. He looks at Dmitri, who isn't shaking at all, just watching the German lines with those ancient eyes of his, waiting. The whistle blows, and then they're up and running across the field, hundreds of men, thousands of men, all screaming and charging toward the German positions, while bullets snap past their heads and artillery shells explode all around them, and men fall and don't get up, and other men stumble and keep running, and the whole world is noise and chaos and fear. Mikhail doesn't remember much of what happens next. Later, he'll learn that the Battle of Gumbinnen was technically a Russian victory. The Germans retreated. The advance continued. But in the moment, there's no way to know that. There's only the running and the shooting and the screaming and the smell of gunpowder and blood and the faces of the men who fall around him. He survives. That night, huddled in a captured German trench that still smells like the men who built it, Mikhail takes out the drawing his son made and unfolds it carefully. The brown cloud that's supposed to be a horse. He looks at it for a long time. Then he refolds it and puts it back in his pocket and says the prayer he promised Katya he would say every night. He doesn't know it yet, but this is only the beginning. In 6 days, disaster will strike. In 6 days, everything will change. In 6 days, 92,000 Russian soldiers will disappear into German prison camps, and a general will walk into a forest alone and put a bullet in his own head rather than face what's coming. But that's 6 days from now. Tonight Mikhail is alive, and that's enough. That's all that matters. He's alive, and the stars are out, and somewhere far to the east, in a little village called Kamenka, his wife is probably looking at the same stars and thinking about him. He closes his eyes. Tomorrow will come whether he's ready for it or not. 6 days after Gumbinen, Mikhail's regiment receives orders to move south. Nobody explains why. Orders in the Russian army don't come with explanations. They just come. You follow them or you don't, and if you don't, well, that's a conversation you have with a firing squad at dawn. So Mikhail packs his kit and falls into line and starts marching, because that's what soldiers do. The weather is brutal. Late August in East Prussia should be pleasant enough, but there's a heat wave sitting over the region like a wet wool blanket, and the roads are choked with dust and water is scarce because the wells in this part of the country are few and far between. Men start dropping from heat exhaustion by midday. The officers push them to keep moving anyway. Pavel walks beside Mikhail, and for a long time neither of them says anything. There's nothing to say. Just put one foot in front of the other. Just keep moving. Just survive until the next rest stop. "Where do you think we're going?" Pavel finally asks. Mikhail shrugs. "South." "I know south. But where south? Why south? Does it matter?" Pavel thinks about this for a moment. "I suppose not." They keep walking. Here's the thing about the Russian army in 1914 that nobody back in Saratov or Moscow or St. Petersburg understands. The army is huge, absolutely massive, millions of men spread across hundreds of miles of front, and the generals back at headquarters, they're looking at maps and moving little wooden pieces around and thinking they understand what's happening. But they don't. They can't. Because the maps don't show the heat and the dust and the exhaustion. The maps don't show the supply wagons stuck in mud 15 miles behind the front. The maps don't show the telegraph lines that keep getting cut, or the radio operators who send messages in plain language because nobody taught them how to use the codes properly. The maps definitely don't show what's about to happen to the Second Army. See, while Mikhail and Pavel and the rest of their regiment are trudging south through the East Prussian countryside, something very bad is taking shape on the German side of the lines. The German commanders, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, they've been reading Russian radio messages like they're the morning newspaper. The Russians have been broadcasting their battle plans, their troop movements, their supply routes, all of it, completely unencrypted, just sending it out into the air for anyone to hear. The Germans hear everything, and they use that information to set a trap. Mikhail's regiment is part of the First Army under General Rennenkampf. They've been pushing west, driving the Germans back, feeling pretty good about themselves. But to the south, there's another Russian army, the Second Army, under General Samsonov, and Samsonov's army is walking straight into a noose. August 26th, the trap springs. Mikhail doesn't know it at the time. He's still marching, still following orders, still putting one foot in front of the other. But somewhere to the south, German artillery opens up on the flanks of the Second Army. German infantry sweeps around behind them. The jaws of the trap begin to close. The first sign of trouble comes that evening. A rider appears on the road ahead, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. He's shouting something that Mikhail can't make out at first, but then the words become clear, and they're not good words. Disaster. Encirclement. The Second Army is surrounded. The officers huddle together and argue in low, urgent voices. Nobody tells the enlisted men anything, but you don't need to be told. You can see it in the way the officers keep looking south. You can hear it in the distant rumble of artillery that never seems to stop. We should help them, Pavel says. We should march south and break through the German lines and save them. An old sergeant overhears this and laughs. It's not a happy laugh. Break through, he says. Boy, we don't even know where the German lines are. We don't know where our own lines are. We don't know anything. That's the problem. He spits in the dust and walks away. Mikhail watches him go and feels something cold settle in his stomach. Back in Kamenka, everyone talked about the war like it was going to be a quick thing. A few months, maybe. The Russian army would roll over the Germans the same way a farmer's cart rolls over a beetle in the road. Nobody mentioned the possibility that the beetle might fight back. Nobody mentioned anything like this. That night nobody sleeps well. The artillery to the south keeps pounding, a rhythm like a giant's heartbeat, steady and relentless. Every few minutes, a brighter flash lights up the horizon. Mikhail lies on his back and stares at the stars and tries to imagine what's happening under that pounding. Thousands of men, probably, huddled in trenches or running across open ground or dying in ways he doesn't want to think about. He touches the icon sewn into his coat, says a prayer. It doesn't make him feel better, but he says it anyway. The next 3 days are chaos. Orders come, and then different orders come that contradict the first orders, and then no orders come at all. The regiment marches south, then east, then south again. They see German cavalry on the distance, but the cavalry doesn't attack. They hear artillery constantly, a low rumble like thunder that never stops, coming from the south where the Second Army is dying. Refugees start appearing on the roads. Russian soldiers, but not organized soldiers, broken soldiers, men without rifles, without units, without hope. They've been walking for days. They've seen things they don't want to talk about. Some of them have the look of men who've stopped being fully human, like something behind their eyes has switched off and might never switch back on. Mikhail stops one of them, a young man about his own age with empty eyes and a uniform caked in mud, and something that might be blood. The uniform is torn at the shoulder, and there's a bandage on his hand, grey and dirty, wrapped around fingers that are probably infected by now. "What happened?" Mikhail asks. The young man stares at him for a long moment. His lips move, but no sound comes out at first. Then he says one word. Everything. And he keeps walking, shuffling past like a man in a dream, heading east toward Russia, toward home, toward anywhere that isn't the place he just came from. Pavel watches him go. You think he'll make it? Mikhail doesn't answer. There's no point. They both know the answer. More refugees come. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. A river of broken men flowing east. And Mikhail's regiment is marching against the current, heading toward the thing all these men are running from. It feels wrong. It feels like swimming toward a waterfall. Here's what happened to the Second Army, though Mikhail won't learn the full story until much later. General Samsonov had over 150,000 men under his command. Good men, brave men. Men who'd marched hundreds of miles to fight for their country. And the Germans surrounded them completely, cut off their supply lines, cut off their communications, cut off any possibility of retreat. For 3 days the Russians fought to break out. Some units managed to escape, most didn't. The Germans captured over 90,000 prisoners. 90,000. That's not a number that makes sense when you say it out loud. That's a whole city's worth of men marching into German captivity with their hands raised and their spirits broken. 30,000 more were killed or wounded. Bodies piled in the forests and fields of East Prussia, left to rot in the summer heat because there was no one to bury them. And General Samsonov. On the night of August 29th, when he finally understood the scale of the disaster, Samsonov walked away from his staff officers. They thought he was going to relieve himself in the woods. He did not come back. They found his body the next day. He'd shot himself rather than face the Tsar and explain how he'd lost an entire army. Mikhail hears about Samsonov's death a week later, sitting around a campfire with what's left of his regiment. The mood is grim. Everyone knows someone who was in the Second Army. Everyone has heard the stories about the prisoners, about the dead, about the German machine guns that cut down whole battalions in minutes. Dmitri, the old soldier who fought in Japan, pokes at the fire with a stick and says nothing for a long time. "The Japanese beat us," he finally says. "Beat us bad. But this is worse. This is the kind of defeat you don't come back from." "We'll come back from it," someone says. "Russia always comes back." Dmitri shakes his head. "I'm not talking about the country. I'm talking about the army. About us. Something breaks inside men when they see this kind of thing. I've seen it before. Once it breaks, it doesn't fix itself." Pavel looks at Mikhail. Neither of them says anything. The Germans don't stop after Tannenberg. 2 weeks later they hit the First Army at the Masurian Lakes. Mikhail's regiment is right in the middle of it. This time there's no victory like at Gumbinnen. This time the Germans have the upper hand, and they use it. The retreat starts slowly and then all at once. Mikhail remembers running through a forest at night, bullets snapping through the branches overhead, men falling and not getting up, the sound of German voices somewhere behind them in the darkness. He remembers losing track of Pavel in the chaos and spending 3 hours searching for him before finding him huddled behind a fallen tree, unhurt, but shaking so badly he can barely hold his rifle. "I thought you were dead," Mikhail says. Pavel just shakes his head. Can't speak. The fear has stolen his voice. They run together after that. Stay close. When you find someone you trust in this kind of madness, you don't let them go. The forest seems endless. Every tree looks the same. Every shadow might be a German soldier. Mikhail's lungs are burning and his legs are screaming and his boots are filled with something wet that might be sweat or might be blood. He can't tell anymore. The weight of his rifle feels like it's doubled since morning, but he keeps running because stopping means dying. Dawn brings no relief. The Germans are still coming. You can hear them crashing through the underbrush, calling to each other in that hard language that sounds like rocks grinding together. Officers are shouting orders, but nobody's listening anymore. The regiment has broken into pieces, every man for himself, every small group stumbling east, trying to find their way back to the Russian lines, hoping the lines still exist. They retreat for 5 days. Mikhail eats whatever he can find, berries from bushes that might be poisonous, bread stolen from an abandoned farmhouse, water from streams that taste like mud and probably worse. His stomach cramps constantly, but he keeps moving because what else can you do? By the time the Russian army finally stops retreating, they're back where they started. Every mile they'd gained, every inch of East Prussia they'd conquered, all of it is gone. The Germans have pushed them back across the border and locked the door behind them. Mikhail sits on a stump and takes out his son's drawing. The brown cloud that's supposed to be a horse. It's gotten crumpled from all the running and fighting and sleeping in ditches, but it's still there. He smooths it out on his knee and looks at it for a long time. He writes a letter to Carrier that night. The words come slowly. His hand is shaking, partly from exhaustion and partly from something else. How do you explain what you've seen to someone who hasn't seen it? How do you describe the sound of a man dying 3 feet away from you? The smell of a body that's been lying in the sun too long? The way your hands shake for hours after the shooting stops? You don't. You can't. He doesn't tell her about Tannenberg, doesn't tell her about the 90,000 prisoners or the general who shot himself in the woods, doesn't tell her about the running and the fear and the bodies he's seen and the friends he's already lost. He just tells her that he's alive and he misses her and he misses Pyotr and he hopes the harvest went well. He asks about the cow, about his father's health, about whether the well is still giving good water, small things, normal things, things that belong to a world that feels very far away now, a world where people worry about crops and weather instead of bullets and artillery. He tells her he'll be home soon. He doesn't believe it, but he writes it anyway, because what else can you say? What words exist for the thing he's experienced? There aren't any. You just write that you're alive and you love your family and you hope to see them again, and you fold the letter and give it to the mail clerk and hope it actually makes it home, because mail from the front is spotty at best. The clerk looks at the stack of letters in his hand. Hundreds of them. Thousands probably from the whole regiment. All those men writing to wives and mothers and children. All those words of love and hope and lies. You think these actually get delivered? Pavel asks, watching the clerk walk away. Some of them, Mikhail says. Maybe. Mine won't. My wife can't read anyway. Mikhail hadn't thought about that. Pavel has never mentioned it before. But of course, most of the women in villages like theirs never learn to read. The priest would have to read the letter to her. The whole village would know what Pavel wrote. War takes everything from you, even your secrets. That night, lying under the stars, Mikhail thinks about what Dmitri said, about things breaking inside men, about damage that doesn't fix itself. He wonders if something is breaking inside him. He doesn't know yet that this is only the beginning. The disaster at Tannenberg, as terrible as it is, will pale in comparison to what's coming. In a few months, the Russian army will score victories against the Austrians that will make the whole empire celebrate. But then the Germans will return, and the retreat will begin again, and this time it won't stop for hundreds of miles. 1 man in 3 will have no rifle. That's what an officer will say next summer, pleading with the French for help. 1 man in 3. The poor fellows wait patiently under the hail of shrapnel for their comrades to fall so they can collect their weapons. But that's still months away. Tonight, Mikhail closes his eyes and tries to sleep. He dreams about wheat fields, about his wife's face, about his son's laugh, about the village of Kamenka, 40 versts east of Saratov, where life goes on whether he's there or not. The dreams are good. The waking is always worse. Somewhere in the distance, German artillery rumbles like approaching thunder. The sound never really stops anymore. Mikhail has started to think he'll hear it for the rest of his life, even if he makes it home, even if the war ends tomorrow. That low, constant rumble, the sound of men dying by the thousands, the sound of an empire starting to crack. He pulls his coat tighter and waits for morning. Morning always comes. That's the thing about war. No matter how bad the night is, no matter how many men die, no matter how hopeless everything seems, morning always comes. The sun rises whether you want it to or not, and when it does, you have to get up and start all over again, one foot in front of the other. Just keep moving, just survive. The orders will come eventually, they always do. And when they come, Mikhail will follow them, because that's what soldiers do. He'll march south or east or west or wherever they tell him to march. He'll fight when they tell him to fight. He'll retreat when they tell him to retreat. And maybe, if he's lucky, he'll make it home. Maybe. October brings news from the south. Good news for a change. While the First and Second Armies were getting torn apart in East Prussia, something different was happening on the Austrian front. The Russians were winning. Actually winning. Pushing the Austro-Hungarian forces back across Galicia, capturing cities, taking prisoners by the tens of thousands. Mikhail's regiment receives orders to transfer south. After months of fighting Germans, they're going to fight Austrians instead. Nobody's sure if this is better or worse. The Germans are terrifying in their efficiency, their machine guns, their artillery that always seems to know exactly where you're standing. But the Austrians, nobody knows much about the Austrians. My uncle fought them once, Pavel says, during the march south. Back in some border skirmish before I was born. He said they weren't so bad. Lots of different people all mixed together. Hungarians and Czechs and Poles and God knows what else. Half of them don't even speak the same language as their officers. Sounds like us, Mikhail says. Pavel laughs. It's the first time Mikhail has heard him laugh since the retreat from the Masurian lakes. Yeah, I suppose it does. The Austrian front is different from the German front in ways Mikhail notices immediately. For one thing, the landscape is different. Instead of the flat farmland of East Prussia, Galicia rolls with gentle hills and deeper valleys. The Carpathian Mountains rise in the distance, snow already capping their peaks even though it's only October. The villages here have a different character too. The churches have different shapes. The people speak languages Mikhail has never heard before. For another thing, the fighting is different. The Austrians don't have the same cold precision as the Germans. Their artillery isn't as accurate. Their officers seem confused half the time, issuing orders that don't make sense, sending troops to positions that have already been abandoned, and the soldiers themselves. The first time Mikhail's regiment captures a group of Austrian prisoners, something strange happens. There are maybe 50 of them, hands raised, uniforms dirty and torn. The Russian soldiers surround them, rifles ready, waiting for orders. And then one of the prisoners starts speaking, in Russian. Well, not exactly Russian, but close. Close enough that Mikhail can understand most of what he's saying. The man is Czech, he explains, from a village near Prague. He was drafted into the Austrian army against his will. He doesn't want to fight Russians. He never wanted to fight Russians. Russians are Slavs. Czechs are Slavs. They're brothers. Please, the man says, we surrender. We don't want to kill our brothers. Mikhail looks at Pavel. Pavel looks at Mikhail. Neither of them knows what to do with this. It happens again and again over the following weeks. The Austro-Hungarian army is a patchwork of peoples who don't particularly like each other and definitely don't want to die for the Habsburgs. Czechs surrender in groups, Slovaks too, Croatians, Bosnians, Galician Poles who'd rather be fighting for Russia than against it. The Russian commanders start spreading the word that Russia is here as a liberator, freeing the Slavic peoples from Austrian oppression. It's propaganda, mostly. Mikhail knows that. But there's something true in it too. These men really don't want to fight. Some of them actively sabotage their own army, firing their rifles into the air during attacks, accidentally getting lost during maneuvers, providing information to Russian scouts about Austrian positions. The victories pile up. At Nila Lipa, the Russians smash through Austrian lines and send them reeling backward. At Lemberg, one of the great cities of Galicia, the Russian army marches through streets lined with cheering crowds. Cheering. Can you imagine? After Tannenberg, after the nightmare of East Prussia, people are actually cheering for them. Mikhail writes to Katya about Lemberg. He describes the buildings, the churches with their golden domes, the cobblestone streets. He doesn't mention the bodies they passed on the way in, or the smell that still hangs over parts of the city, or the way some of the cheering crowds looked more terrified than happy. He just tells her about the churches and the cobblestones and how beautiful it all is. He's getting better at lying in his letters. November brings the siege of Przemysl. Przemysl is a fortress, a real fortress, not just a line of trenches, but an actual honest-to-God fortification with walls and towers and underground bunkers and enough guns to hold off an army. The Austrians have packed it full of soldiers and supplies and dug in for a long fight. Looking at it from the Russian lines, Mikhail feels something close to awe. The walls rise up against the grey sky like something out of a fairy tale, something built by giants in a time before time. "How are we supposed to take that?" he asks Dmitri. The old soldier shrugs. "We don't take it. We wait. We starve them out." And so they do. The Russian army surrounds the fortress and settles in for a siege. Siege warfare is different from the running and fighting Mikhail has gotten used to. It's slower, more boring in a way. You dig trenches, you watch the walls, you wait for something to happen. Occasionally the fortress guns open up and you dive for cover, but mostly you just sit there and wait. Time moves differently during a siege. Hours feel like days. Days feel like weeks. You start to forget what it was like to move freely, to walk somewhere without looking over your shoulder. The worst part is the cold. The winter comes early that year. By December, the ground is frozen solid, and the snow is knee-deep and everyone is miserable. The Austrian garrison is more miserable, trapped inside their fortress with supplies running low, but that doesn't make Mikhail feel any warmer. He sleeps in a dugout he shares with Pavel and 3 other men, all of them pressed together for warmth, breathing each other's breath, smelling each other's unwashed bodies. "You know what I miss?" Pavel says one night, his voice barely above a whisper in the darkness. "What?" "Clean feet. I used to have clean feet. Remember clean feet?" Mikhail tries to remember the last time his feet were clean. He can't. It's been months. His boots are falling apart and his socks are more whole than fabric and his feet are covered in blisters and calluses and probably some kind of fungus that he doesn't want to think about. "I remember clean feet," he says. "I think. I'd give anything for clean feet right now. Anything. What about clean hands? Hands I can live without. But feet. Man. Clean feet." It's a stupid conversation. The kind of conversation you have at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep and you're cold and hungry and scared and there's nothing else to talk about. But it makes Mikhail smile. For a moment, just a moment, things feel almost normal. Christmas comes and goes. Someone finds a bottle of vodka from somewhere. They pass it around and sing songs and pretend that everything is fine. The officers look the other way. Everyone needs this. Even the fortress, silent and dark across the frozen plain, seems to pause for the holiday. Word comes from the south. The Ottoman Empire has entered the war, At first, this seems like a disaster. Another enemy. The Russian army is already stretched thin, fighting Germans in the north and Austrians in the centre. Now the Ottomans are attacking from the south, bombarding Russian ports on the Black Sea, pushing into the Caucasus Mountains. Men grumble around the campfires. How many enemies can one country fight at once? But Dmitri, as usual, sees it differently. "The Turks are good for us," he says one night, warming his hands over a small fire. "The snow is coming down hard and the wind cuts through every layer of clothing like it isn't there." "Good for us?" Pavel asks. "Another 1,000,000 soldiers trying to kill us is good?" "Think about it." Dmitri pulls his coat tighter. "Why are we fighting this war? What's the point of all this?" Nobody answers. It's a question everyone has asked themselves at some point, lying in a trench in the dark, wondering why they're here and not home with their families. "Protecting Serbia," someone offers. Nobody cares about Serbia. No offence to the Serbs, but nobody in Kamenka or Saratov or anywhere else in Russia gives a damn about Serbia. We need a reason. A real reason. Something men can understand in their guts. He points south toward the distant Ottoman Empire. That's our reason. Right there. 400 years Russia has dreamed of taking Constantinople back. Every grandfather tells his grandson about it. Every priest mentions it in his sermons. That's something worth fighting for. That's something men will die for. The officers start telling the men that when the war is won, Russia will take Constantinople. The great cathedral of Hagia Sophia will be Christian again. The Mediterranean will be open to Russian ships. Centuries of history will be avenged. It's propaganda again. Mikhail knows this, but it works. You can see it in the way men stand a little straighter, fight a little harder. This isn't just about some archduke nobody's ever heard of anymore. This is about something bigger, something that matters. January 1915. The siege continues. Inside Przemysl, the Austrians are starving. Rumours filter through the lines. They've eaten all the horses. They're eating dogs now. Cats, rats, anything that moves. The fortress commander keeps sending messages asking for relief, but no relief comes. The Austrian army's in full retreat everywhere else. There's no one left to save them. Mikhail almost feels sorry for them. Almost. Then he remembers the friends he's lost. The men who fell at Gumbinin and Tannenberg and the Masurian lakes. The ones who died screaming in the mud. The ones who just disappeared and were never found. He thinks about their families back in Russia. Women who will spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened to their husbands and sons and brothers. And the pity goes away. March brings the end. The fortress of Przemysl surrenders on March 22nd, 1915. Over 100,000 Austrian soldiers march out with their hands raised. 100,000. It's the biggest Austrian surrender of the entire war. Russian soldiers line the roads and watch them pass. This endless river of defeated men, and for once nobody fires a shot. They look terrible. Gaunt faces, hollow eyes, uniforms hanging off bodies that have shed half their weight over the winter months. Some of them can barely walk, leaning on each other, shuffling forward like old men even though most of them are young. This is what starvation looks like. This is what defeat looks like. Mikhail stands with Pavel and watches. "That could have been us," Pavel says quietly. "At Tannenberg, that almost was us." Mikhail nods. He's thinking the same thing. War is strange like that. A few different decisions, a few different orders, and the men marching into captivity would be wearing Russian uniforms instead of Austrian ones. There's nothing special about any of them. They're just men, farmers and shopkeepers and factory workers who got told to pick up rifles and point them at other farmers and shopkeepers and factory workers. One of the prisoners catches Mikhail's eye as he passes. A young man, maybe 20 years old, with dark hair and a face that could belong to someone from Mikhail's own village. Czech, probably, or Slovak. Another Slav, fighting on the wrong side of a war he didn't choose. For a moment their eyes meet. Neither of them speaks. What would they say? Then the prisoner looks away and keeps walking, one foot in front of the other, heading toward whatever prison camp awaits him somewhere in the vastness of Russia. Mikhail wonders if he'll survive. The odds aren't good. Everyone knows how prisoners are treated. Not enough food, not enough shelter. Disease spreading through the camps like fire through dry grass. This man might have survived the siege only to die in a prison barrack 6 months from now, but that's not Mikhail's problem. He has his own survival to worry about. That night there's celebration in the Russian camp. Real celebration, not the forced cheer of Christmas. Men are laughing and drinking and singing. Officers shake hands and congratulate each other. Someone produces an accordion and there's dancing. Actual dancing in the snow. Mikhail sits apart from the celebration and takes out his son's drawing. It's getting worn now. The paper is soft from being folded and unfolded so many times. The colours have faded, but he can still see the brown cloud that's supposed to be a horse. He traces the lines with his finger and thinks about Pyotr, who must be nearly 4 years old now. Does he remember his father? Does he ask about him? Katya's letters don't come often, and when they do come, they're full of reassurances that everything is fine. The harvest was good. Pyotr is growing. Everyone misses him. They pray for him every night. He folds the drawing and puts it away. For a moment, just a moment, he lets himself believe that the war might actually end soon. The Austrians are collapsing. The Ottomans are struggling in the Caucasus. Even the Germans must be getting tired. Maybe by summer this will all be over. Maybe by fall he'll be home. He doesn't know what's coming. He doesn't know that the Germans have been planning something massive, a breakthrough that will reverse every Russian gain, a retreat that will make Tannenberg look like a minor setback. 100,000 square kilometers abandoned. Cities and towns and villages surrendered without a fight. He doesn't know that in 3 months Russian soldiers will be fighting without rifles, waiting for their comrades to die so they can pick up their weapons. He doesn't know that the celebration in the snow tonight will be the last real victory the Russian Empire ever wins. But for now, sitting in the firelight with his son's drawing in his pocket and the sound of singing in his ears, none of that matters. For now, things are good. For now, there's hope. The fire crackles and pops. Someone adds another log. The accordion player starts a new song, something slow and sad and beautiful, about a man who went to war and never came home. The dancers stop dancing and just listen. Mikhail closes his eyes. Tomorrow will bring new orders, new marches, new battles. The war will continue whether he's ready for it or not. But tonight, just tonight, he lets himself rest, lets himself believe, lets himself hope. The snow falls softly on the battlefield, and somewhere far to the east, in a little village called Kamenka, a woman and a child are sleeping, dreaming of a man they love, waiting for him to come home. The good times end in May. Mikhail's regiment is still in Galicia when the news arrives. The Germans have broken through. Not a small breakthrough, not a local setback that can be contained and reversed. A real breakthrough, a catastrophic one, the kind that changes everything. It happens at a place called Gorlice Tarnov, about 100 miles south of where Mikhail is stationed. The Germans have brought in fresh troops, fresh artillery, fresh everything. They've been planning this for months while the Russians were celebrating at Przemysl, patting themselves on the back, believing the worst was over. The worst wasn't over. The worst was just getting started. The Austrian line collapses first. No surprise there. The Austrians have been collapsing all year. But this time the Germans are right behind them, pouring through the gap, rolling up the Russian defences like a man rolling up a carpet. Within days, the breakthrough is miles wide. Within weeks, it's threatening to cut off entire Russian armies. The order comes to retreat. Mikhail has retreated before, after Tannenberg, after the Masurian lakes. He knows what retreat feels like, the confusion, the fear, the sense that everything is falling apart faster than anyone can comprehend. But this retreat is different. This retreat doesn't stop. They abandon Przemysl first. The fortress they spent all winter besieging. The fortress where 100,000 Austrians surrendered. The fortress that was supposed to be a symbol of Russian victory. Gone. Just like that. The Germans march in without firing a shot. Then Lemberg falls. The beautiful city with the golden dome churches, the city where crowds cheered as Russian soldiers marched through the streets. Gone too. The retreat continues, day after day, week after week. Every morning Mikhail wakes up hoping that today will be the day they stop running. Every morning the order comes to fall back another 10 miles, another 20 miles, another 50 miles. The ground they bled for, the ground their friends died for, given up without a fight because there's no way to hold it anymore. And the worst part? The ammunition. There isn't any. Well, that's not quite true. There's some, but not enough. Not nearly enough. Artillery batteries that should be firing hundreds of shells per day are down to a handful. Machine gun posts run dry in the middle of firefights. And rifles. God, the rifles. Mikhail still has his, the one he took from Yuri back in August, the man who caught shrapnel in the throat on the approach to Gumbinnen. He's cleaned it and maintained it and kept it working through everything. The wood stock is worn smooth from handling now. The metal is scratched and dented. But it still fires true, and that's what matters. That's everything. Because not everyone has one. Not even close. New recruits arrive at the front with nothing in their hands. Nothing. Mikhail sees it happen for the first time in late May. A train pulls up at a depot behind the lines and maybe 200 men climb out. Fresh faces. New uniforms that still have creases from the factory. They form up in neat rows, the way they've been trained, and they wait for someone to issue them weapons. No one does. A sergeant walks down the line and explains the situation. There aren't enough rifles. The factories can't keep up with demand. Men will have to share or wait or find weapons on the battlefield. Find weapons on the battlefield. That's actually what he says. Like rifles are something you stumble across while taking a walk. Like dead men are a natural resource to be harvested. One of the new men speaks up. But how are we supposed to fight without weapons? The sergeant doesn't have an answer. He just shrugs and walks away. They're told to wait. Wait for what? Wait for someone to die so they can pick up their weapon. That's the actual plan. That's the actual official strategy. Men are sent into combat unarmed, told to follow behind the armed soldiers, told to grab a rifle when one becomes available. When one becomes available means when the man carrying it gets killed. Mikhail watches a group of these new recruits arrive one evening in June. They're young, 18, 19 years old. Boys, really. They've had maybe 2 weeks of training before being shipped to the front. Some of them still have the soft faces of children who've never missed a meal, never slept in the rain, never seen a man die. One of them approaches Mikhail. The kid can't be more than 17, though he claims to be 19 on his papers. Everyone lies about their age. The army doesn't check too carefully. "Excuse me," the kid says. "Do you know where I can get a rifle?" Mikhail stares at him. "They didn't give you one?" "They said there weren't enough. They said I should find one here." "Find one where?" The kid shrugs. He doesn't know. Nobody told him. He was just shipped here like cargo, like a sack of potatoes, dumped at the front with nothing but the clothes on his back and the vague instruction to find a rifle. Mikhail doesn't know what to say. What can you say to something like that? "Welcome to the war, kid. Hope you're faster than the bullets." The retreat continues. June, July, August. The Russian army falls back and back and back. Warsaw falls. The great city, the heart of Russian Poland, conquered by the Germans. Brest-Litovsk falls. The fortresses fall one after another, dominoes toppling, everything collapsing at once. An officer tells Mikhail's regiment that they've given up over 100,000 square kilometers. 100,000. Mikhail doesn't even know how to picture that. It's bigger than some countries. It's bigger than anything he can imagine. All that land, all those villages and towns and cities, all of it now under German boots. People are fleeing too. Not just soldiers, civilians. Whole populations uprooted and running east, away from the German advance. Mikhail sees them on the road sometimes, families with everything they own piled on carts, old people walking with canes, children crying, everyone moving in the same direction. East. Always east. Away from the war that won't stop coming. Some of the soldiers help when they can, share food, give directions. But mostly there's nothing to do. The civilians are just as trapped as the soldiers, maybe more so. At least soldiers have orders to follow, places to be. The civilians have nothing but the desperate need to get away. One afternoon, Mikhail's regiment passes through a village that's being evacuated. The army has ordered everyone out. Scorched earth, they're calling it. Don't leave anything for the Germans. Burn what you can't carry. It sounds sensible when you say it fast, like a military strategy. But when you see it happening, it's something else entirely. There's an old woman standing in the doorway of a house that's been marked for burning. She won't leave. Soldiers are trying to convince her, their voices patient at first, then frustrated, then desperate. But she just stands there, arms crossed, shaking her head. A lifetime of stubbornness in that small bent body. "This is my home," she says. "My husband built this house with his own hands. My children were born in that room. My mother died in that bed. I'm not leaving. Mom, the Germans are coming, you have to go. Then let them come. I'll be here. This is where I belong." One of the soldiers, a young man who can't be more than 20, looks like he might cry. "Please, we're trying to help you. Help me by leaving me alone." But they can't. Orders are orders. The village must burn. In the end, they have to drag her away. 2 soldiers, one on each arm, pulling her down the dirt path while she screams and fights, this tiny old woman who probably weighs less than a sack of grain. She curses them in Russian, and in some other language Mikhail doesn't recognize. She calls them murderers, thieves, worse things. They set fire to the house as she watches. The flames catch slowly at first, then spread, licking up the wooden walls, consuming the thatched roof. She stops fighting then, just goes still, watches the flames consume everything she ever knew, everything she ever was. Mikhail thinks about Kamenka, about his own Izba, the one his grandfather built, about Katya and Pyotr inside it. going about their lives, not knowing what's happening out here. If the Germans push far enough, would Russian soldiers burn his house too? Would they drag Katya away while she screamed and fought? He looks away. He can't watch anymore. The retreat continues. Dmitri dies in August, not in combat. That's the strange thing. After everything he survived, the war against Japan, the disaster at Tannenberg, the endless retreat, the old soldier dies from dysentery. His body just gives out one night. Too many months of bad food and bad water and not enough rest. He goes to sleep complaining about stomach cramps and doesn't wake up. Mikhail finds him in the morning. At first he thinks Dmitri is just sleeping late, which would be unlike him. Dmitri was always the first one awake, the first one ready, the first one moving. Then Mikhail sees his face, the stillness, the colour that isn't quite right. And he knows. Pavel doesn't. Believe it at first. Keeps saying Dmitri's name, shaking his shoulder, like he can wake him up through sheer stubbornness. But the dead don't wake, no matter how hard you shake them. Mikhail has learned that lesson too many times already. They dig the grave themselves. The ground is hard and rocky and it takes hours, their hands blistering on the shovel handles, sweat running down their faces even though the morning is cool. Other soldiers offer to help. Mikhail and Pavel refuse. This is something they need to do themselves. Dmitri deserves that much. He was the one who taught them how to survive. Stay low. Keep your head down. Don't volunteer for anything. Simple rules that kept them alive when so many others died. They lower him into the earth wrapped in a blanket. No coffin. There are no coffins at the front. Just the blanket and the hole and the dirt that they shovel back in, one load at a time. They put a cross at the head of the grave, 2 sticks tied together with bootlaces. It won't last. The rain will knock it down, or the wind, or maybe the Germans will march through and trample it. But for now, at least, there's a cross. A marker that says a man lived and died here. That he mattered to someone. Pavel says a prayer. Something from his childhood. Words he half remembers from church services that seem like they happened in another lifetime. Mikhail tries to pray too, but the words won't come. He's not sure he believes in prayers anymore. Not after everything he's seen. What kind of God lets this happen? What kind of God watches men die for nothing and does nothing to stop it? He doesn't say this out loud. You don't say things like that. Not here. Not ever. That night, for the first time since the war began, Mikhail cries. He doesn't make any noise, can't afford to. Men would hear, men would talk. So he just lies in the darkness with tears running down his face, thinking about Dmitri and thinking about home and thinking about all the men who've died and all the men who are going to die before this thing finally ends, if it ever ends. September brings a change. Tsar Nicholas II takes personal command of the army. The news spreads through the ranks like wildfire. The Tsar himself, the little father, coming to lead them personally. Some men take this as a sign of hope. If the Tsar is taking charge, things must be about to get better. The Tsar wouldn't put himself at risk unless he knew they could win. Others see it differently. Pavel is one of them. He's desperate, Pavel says, keeping his voice low so the officers won't hear. The generals have failed. The war is falling apart. He's taking command because there's no one else left to blame. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? It's true. Mikhail doesn't argue. He's not sure Pavel is wrong. The retreat finally slows in late September. The front stabilizes somewhere east of where it was a year ago, east of all the ground they won, east of all the victories that turned to ash. The Germans have outrun their supply lines. They need to stop and reorganize before pushing further. The Russian army uses the pause to catch its breath. Reinforcements arrive, ammunition trickles in. Not enough, never enough, but more than before. The factories back home are finally starting to produce what the army needs. Too little, too late, but something. Mikhail looks at a map one evening, borrowed from a lieutenant who owes him a favour. He traces the front line with his finger. A year ago, Russian soldiers were standing in East Prussia, threatening the German heartland. Now they're hundreds of miles east, and the Germans are the ones doing the threatening. 100,000 square kilometres. 100,000 square kilometres of Russian territory, given up because there weren't enough rifles, weren't enough shells, weren't enough anything. Because generals made stupid decisions and soldiers paid for them with their lives. Because the whole rotten system finally showed what it was made of, and what it was made of was nothing. Mikhail folds the map and gives it back. He writes to Katya that night. Tells her he's alive. Tells her the fighting has slowed down. Tells her maybe the worst is over. He doesn't know if he believes it. He takes out his son's drawing, the brown cloud horse. It's barely recognizable anymore, worn thin by months of handling, the colours faded to ghosts. But he can still see it, can still remember the day Pyotr made it, sitting on the floor of their izba with coloured pencils someone had given him, tongue sticking out in concentration the way children do when they're focused on something important. That was a lifetime ago. That was another world. Mikhail folds the drawing carefully and puts it back in his pocket. He lies down on the hard ground, wraps himself in his coat, and closes his eyes. Tomorrow will bring new orders, new positions, new preparations for whatever comes next. The Germans aren't done. The Austrians aren't done. The war isn't done. There's still so much dying left to do. But tonight at least the guns are quiet. Tonight at least he can sleep. And somewhere in the darkness, far from the front lines, a kid with no rifle huddles in a trench and waits for morning, waits for the battle that might give him a weapon, waits to see if he'll live or die based on how quickly someone else stops breathing. That's the war now. That's what it's become. 1 man in 3 has no rifle. The poor fellows wait patiently under the hail of shrapnel for their comrades to fall so they can collect their weapons. Those are the words a Russian general will use, pleading with the French ambassador for help. Words that will echo through history. Words that capture something so broken, so wrong, so completely absurd that it doesn't seem like it could possibly be true. But it is true. Mikhail knows it's true. He's seen it with his own eyes, and he knows, deep in his bones, that the war is far from over, that the worst isn't behind them after all, that somewhere ahead, in the months and years to come, there are horrors waiting that he can't even imagine yet. But for now, he sleeps. For now, that's enough. Stories travel through the army like smoke through cloth. You can't stop them, can't control them. One day nobody knows anything, and the next day everyone is talking about something that happened hundreds of miles away, passing it from man to man, each telling, adding or subtracting details until you can't tell anymore what's true and what's legend. The story of a Somme fortress reaches Mikhail's regiment in late August, just as the Great Retreat is finally slowing down. A Somme, a fortress in the swamps of what used to be Russian Poland. Not a big fortress, not a famous one. Just a collection of walls and bunkers guarding a railway line through the marshes, the kind of place that would never make it into the history books under normal circumstances. These weren't normal circumstances. The Germans wanted that railway. They'd been pounding Osowiec for months, artillery barrages, infantry assaults, everything they had. But the Russians held on. 900 men against 14 German battalions. The fortress walls crumbled and the Russians kept fighting from the rubble. The towers fell and the Russians built new positions from the debris. They had almost nothing and they held on anyway. Then, on August 6th, the Germans decided to try something different. Gas. Mikhail hears the story from a soldier named Grigory, who claims his cousin was there. Maybe the cousin was really there. Maybe he wasn't. It doesn't matter. The story is true either way. Mikhail has heard it from too many sources for it to be false. Too many men with the same haunted look in their eyes when they tell it. The Germans release the gas at 4 a.m. Chlorine and bromine mixed together, a cocktail designed to kill in the most terrible way imaginable. A greenish-yellow cloud rolling across the marshes toward the fortress, low to the ground, hugging every depression in the earth, filling every trench and bunker and dugout. The men on watch saw it coming. Some of them tried to run. Some of them tried to sound the alarm. None of them got far. The cloud moved faster than a man could run. The grass turned black where it passed. Birds fell out of the sky, mid-flight, just dropping like stones. Frogs in the swamps died by the thousands. Even the insects stopped buzzing. Everything that breathed, everything that needed air to survive died. And the Russians had no gas masks. Some of them did, supposedly, but they were useless. Old models from before the war that didn't seal properly, new models that had been ordered but hadn't arrived yet because nothing ever arrives on time in the Russian army. Most men had nothing at all, nothing between their lungs and that greenish-yellow death rolling toward them. They tried wrapping wet, cloths around their faces, shirts soaked in water, rags soaked in urine, because someone had heard that might help, that the ammonia might neutralize the chlorine somehow. It didn't help. The gas found its way in anyway. It always finds its way in. You can hold your breath for a minute, maybe 2, but eventually you have to breathe. And when you breathe, it's over. 800 men dead in minutes. 800 men gasping and choking and clawing at their throats as the chlorine ate through their lungs from the inside. The gas reacted with the moisture in their bodies and turned to acid. Imagine that. Acid forming inside your chest, dissolving you from within. Some men died fast. Others died slow, coughing up blood and pieces of their own lungs, drowning in the fluids their bodies were producing in a desperate attempt to fight off something they couldn't fight. The Germans waited for the gas to clear. They knew what they'd done. They knew nothing could have survived that cloud. 14 battalions advanced toward the fortress, 7,000 men walking casually toward what should have been a mass grave. They weren't expecting resistance. They got it anyway. Out of the gas cloud, out of the trenches full of dead men came the survivors. Maybe 100 of them, maybe fewer. Men who should have been dead. Men who were dying even as they charged. Their faces were wrapped in bloody rags. Their eyes were swollen shut from the chemicals. They were coughing up blood and tissue with every step, leaving red trails in the dirt behind them, and they attacked. The Germans saw them coming and couldn't believe what they were seeing. These weren't soldiers. These were corpses, walking corpses rising from the poison cloud like something out of a nightmare. The Russians screamed as they came, howling through their ruined throats, bayonets fixed, charging straight at the German lines. The Germans ran, 7,000 men, trained soldiers, armed to the teeth. They ran from 100 dying men who wouldn't stay dead. The Russians recaptured their trenches. They drove the Germans back. and then, one by one, they fell. Some died that day. Others lasted a few more hours or a few more days. Almost none of them survived more than a week. The gas had done its work. It was just taking its time. But they won. That's the thing Mikhail can't stop thinking about. They won. Men who were already dead, who had to know they were already dead, still found it in themselves to pick up their rifles and charge. Still found the anger, the hatred, the sheer, stubborn refusal to give up that carried them across that field. The newspapers call it the attack of the dead men. Mikhail doesn't know what to call it. Heroism, madness, both. He lies awake at night thinking about those men, thinking about what it must have felt like to breathe that gas and know you were going to die and decide to die fighting instead of lying down. Thinking about whether he could do the same. Thing if he had to. He hopes he never finds out. Winter comes again. Mikhail's regiment is stationed somewhere east of Vilna now, in a landscape of frozen lakes and dense forests. The front has stabilized. The Germans are dug in. The Russians are dug in. Nobody's going anywhere. That's what Mikhail thinks anyway. Then the orders come. The French are in trouble. Again. The Germans are hitting them hard at a place called Verdun, grinding them down in a battle that's already killed tens of thousands. The French need help. They need someone to attack the Germans somewhere else, force them to pull troops away from Verdun, give the French a chance to breathe. Russia will attack at Lake Naroch. Mikhail looks at the map when the lieutenant shows it to them. Lake Naroch is a big lake in the middle of a swamp, in a region that's barely inhabited even in summer. It's March now. The ground is still frozen. The snow is still deep. The swamps are solid enough to walk on if you're careful, but the spring thaw could come any day. "This is insane," Pavel says quietly. "We can't fight in that." But they can. They will. Because someone in a room far from the front has looked at a map and decided that this is where the attack will happen. Because the French need help, and Russia has promised to provide it. Because in war, men die for reasons that have nothing to do with reason. The attack begins on March 18th. The artillery opens up first, the biggest bombardment Mikhail has ever heard. Thousands of guns firing at once, a sound so loud it stops being sound and becomes something else, a pressure in your chest, a vibration in your bones. The shells fall on the German positions across the lake, throwing up fountains of dirt and ice and snow. Then the infantry advances. Mikhail's regiment is in the second wave. He watches the first wave go. Thousands of men trudging across the frozen marshland toward the German lines. They move slowly. The snow is up to their knees in places, up to their waists in others. They look like they're wading through white water, pushing against a current that wants to drag them down. The German machine guns open up. Men start falling. At first it's just a few, here and there, stumbling and not getting back up. Then more. The neat lines dissolve into chaos as men try to find cover in a landscape that offers none. The snow isn't deep enough to hide in. The ice isn't thick enough to stop bullets. They're just out there, exposed, dying in the open. The order comes to advance. Mikhail goes. He doesn't remember much of what happens next, just fragments, flashes. The feeling of his boots breaking through ice into freezing water underneath. The sound of bullets snapping past his head. A man in front of him going down with a grunt, falling face first into the snow and not moving. Pavel somewhere nearby, shouting something he can't hear over the gunfire. They make it to a trench. German, abandoned, half collapsed. They pile in and take cover and wait for orders that don't come. Hours pass, the sun goes down, the temperature drops, And then the real nightmare begins. See, during the day, the attacks had churned up the ground. The snow had melted in places mixed with mud and blood and God knows what else. Men had waded through it, getting soaked up to their chests. Their uniforms were heavy with freezing water. Their boots were full of it. Their skin was wet and raw from hours of marching and fighting in that slush. And now, as night falls and the temperature plunges below freezing, all that water starts to turn to ice. Mikhail feels it happening, the wetness in his clothes going stiff, his trousers hardening against his skin like they're turning to wood, the mud around his boots solidifying, gripping tighter and tighter. He tries to move and finds that he can't. His legs are stuck, frozen into the ground like posts set in concrete. He's not the only one. All around him men are trapped, cemented to the earth by ice that's forming around them, on them, through them. A man to his left is whimpering, pulling at his legs, trying to break free. A man to his right has stopped moving entirely, just staring straight ahead with glassy eyes, either in shock or already halfway to dead. Some men panic and try to tear themselves free. The ice cuts their skin, draws blood that freezes immediately, rips their clothes, holds them tighter. Other men just give up, sitting in the frozen muck, waiting for someone to help them. No one helps. How can anyone help? The officers are trapped too. Everyone is trapped. The whole army is stuck to the ground like flies on paper, and the temperature keeps dropping, and the ice keeps hardening, and somewhere out there in the darkness the Germans are probably wondering why the Russians have gone so quiet. By morning, some of the men are dead, just frozen where they sat, turned into statues of ice and cloth and flesh. Others are alive but can't move, trapped in positions they've held all night, their bodies rigid with cold and shock. The survivors have to be cut free. Mikhail watches soldiers with bayonets and axes chopping at the ice around their comrades, trying to free them without cutting off their limbs. It takes hours. The Germans don't attack because they're probably too shocked by what they're seeing to do anything about it. Or maybe they're just laughing. Mikhail would laugh too if he saw his enemies destroying themselves like this. The attack continues for 8 more days. 8 more days of advancing across frozen swamps. 8 more days of men getting stuck in ice. 8 more days of machine gun fire and artillery and death. The Russians outnumber the Germans 3-1 in this sector. They have more guns, more ammunition, more everything. They lose 5 times as many men. When it's finally over, when someone finally decides that enough is enough and calls off the attack, the Russians have suffered over 100,000 casualties. 100,000. And they've gained nothing. Not a single mile. Not a single village. The Germans are exactly where they were before the attack began. 12,000 men died of frostbite alone. 12,000. Frozen to death in the marshes because someone decided that March was a good time to attack through a swamp. Mikhail sees some of them afterward, the ones they couldn't retrieve during the battle. Bodies frozen in the barbed wire, still reaching forward, still trying to advance even in death. 5,000 of them caught in the wire. 5,000 men who made it close enough to see the German trenches and died there, tangled in metal thorns, turning slowly to ice. Pavel survives. Mikhail survives. They're lucky. Or maybe not lucky. Maybe survival is just another kind of curse. Maybe the lucky ones are the ones who froze to death, who don't have to keep going, keep fighting, keep living through whatever comes next. Mikhail doesn't let himself think that way for long. It's dangerous thinking like that. Once you start, it's hard to stop. Spring comes eventually. The snow melts. The ice breaks up. The bodies in the marshes start to surface. All those men who fell through the ice or froze in the mud, coming back up as the ground softens. The smell is terrible. The sight is worse. Mikhail writes to Katya. He doesn't tell her about Lake Naroch, doesn't tell her about the men frozen in the wire or the ones cut free from the ice or the walking dead at Ossowiec. He tells her the same things he always tells her. I'm alive. I miss you. I miss Pyotr. I hope the spring planting goes well. He's running out of things to say. The lies are getting harder to maintain. The distance between what he writes and what he lives keeps growing until the letters feel like they're coming from someone else entirely, someone who still believes in things, someone who still has hope. He takes out the drawing, the brown cloud horse. It's so worn now that he can barely see the lines. The paper is soft as cloth, threatening to fall apart every time he unfolds it. He folds it again, puts it away, closes his eyes. The war goes on. It always goes on. And somewhere in a German camp, strategists are looking at maps and planning the next attack. And somewhere in Russia, politicians are arguing about who to blame for Lake Naroch. And somewhere in France, men are dying at Verdun in numbers that make Lake Naroch look like a skirmish. But here, in a trench on the Eastern Front, Mikhail Volkov just wants to sleep. Just wants to forget for a few hours that any of this is real. The stars come out. The same stars that shine over Kamenka. The same stars his son might be looking at right now, wondering where his father is and when he's coming home. Soon, Mikhail thinks. Soon. But he doesn't believe it anymore. He's not sure he believes anything anymore. June 1916. Something is different. Mikhail can feel it before anyone tells him anything. There's an energy in the camp that hasn't been there since the early days of the war, back when everyone thought this would be over by Christmas. Men are standing straighter. Officers are actually smiling. The ammunition wagons that roll through aren't half empty anymore. And then he hears the name, Brusilov, General Alexei Brusilov, commander of the Southwestern Front, the man who's going to change everything. Mikhail has heard generals' names before. Usually they come attached to disasters. Samsonov at Tannenberg, the faceless men who ordered the attack at Lake Naroch. Names that make soldiers spit when they hear them. But Brusilov is different. The men who serve under him actually respect him. Word is he cares about his soldiers. Word is he actually knows what he's doing. He's planning something big, Pavel says one evening, as they sit around a small fire cooking whatever meat they managed to scrounge that day. Something that's going to hit the Austrians so hard they won't get back up. Who told you that? Everyone's talking about it. The sergeants, the officers, even the supply clerks, and those bastards never know anything. Mikhail pokes at the fire with a stick. He wants to believe. After Lake Naroch, after the Great Retreat, after everything, he wants to believe that something good might finally happen. But hope is dangerous. Hope gets you killed. I'll believe it when I see it, he says. He sees it on June 4th. The artillery opens up at dawn. Not the scattered, wasteful bombardment that preceded Lake Naroch. This is different. This is precise. Brusilov has spent months studying the Austrian positions, using airplanes to photograph their trenches, identifying exactly where every bunker and machine gun nest is located. And now his guns are hitting those positions with the accuracy that Mikhail has never seen before. The ground shakes, the sky fills with smoke and fire, and then, after maybe an hour, it stops. The silence is almost worse than the noise, and then the order comes, advance. Mikhail goes over the top with the rest of his regiment. He's done this before. too many times. He knows what to expect. The machine guns, the screaming, the men falling on either side of him, the terror that grips your chest and doesn't let go until it's over. But this time is different. The Austrian trenches are empty. Not empty. There are bodies. Austrian bodies, torn apart by the artillery, scattered across the churned earth like broken dolls. But the men who survived, the men who should be manning the machine guns and throwing grenades and trying to kill Mikhail and everyone he knows, they're gone. They've run. The Russians push forward. It happens so fast that Mikhail can barely process it. 1 minute they're advancing across no man's land expecting to die. The next minute they're in the Austrian trenches, then past them, then moving across open country that no Russian soldier has seen in over a year. They capture a village, then another village, then a town. The Austrians are in full retreat. Not an organised retreat like the Russians did last summer. This is a rout, a complete collapse. Austrian soldiers are throwing down their weapons and surrendering by the hundreds, by the thousands. Entire units giving up without firing a shot. Officers trying to rally their men and getting ignored or, in some cases, shot by their own troops. Mikhail takes a prisoner on the third day of the offensive. A young Austrian kid, maybe 18, with blonde hair and terrified blue eyes. He comes out of a shell crater with his hands up, babbling something in German that Mikhail doesn't understand. "Don't shoot," Pavel translates. He picked up some German during the long winters in the trenches. "Please don't shoot. I surrender. I don't want to die." Mikhail doesn't shoot. He hasn't been shooting at much of anything for the past 3 days. There's been no need. The enemy just keeps running. They send the Austrian kid to the rear with the other prisoners. There are so many prisoners that the Russians don't know what to do with them all. Columns of captured men stretching back for miles, guarded by soldiers who can barely believe what's happening. A week into the offensive, an officer shares the numbers with Mikhail's regiment. The Austrian Fourth Army started with 117,000 men. 7 days later, they're down to 35,000. A loss of 70%. 70%. Mikhail has to ask the officer to repeat it because he's sure he heard wrong. But he didn't hear wrong. The Austrians have been destroyed. And it's not just the Fourth Army. Up and down the line, everywhere Brusilov's forces attack, the story is the same. Austrian units collapsing. Austrian commanders panicking. The whole front coming apart at the seams. For the first time in 2 years, Mikhail allows himself to hope. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the turning point. Maybe the Austrians will surrender and the Germans will have to make peace and everyone can go home. Maybe he'll see Katya again. See his son, who must be almost 5 years old now, who probably doesn't even remember what his father looks like. The offensive continues through June, into July. The Russians advance 50 miles, 100 miles. They take cities whose names Mikhail has only heard in officers' briefings. Lutsk, Brody, Stanislaw. Places that were Austrian yesterday and are Russian today. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is cracking. You can feel it. The whole rotten structure is finally starting to fall apart. Romania sees it too. Word comes in late August that Romania has joined the war on Russia's side. Another ally, another 1,000,000 soldiers. The Austrians will have to fight on yet another front, stretch their already broken army even thinner. Surely now the end must be coming. But something changes in September. The Germans arrive. Not the same Germans Mikhail fought in East Prussia. Different divisions, fresh divisions, men who've been pulled from other fronts shipped east to save what's left of their Austrian allies. And these Germans don't run like the Austrians did. The advance slows. At first it's barely noticeable. A village that takes 2 days to capture instead of 2 hours. A ridge that costs 1,000 casualties instead of 100. The supply lines stretching thin, ammunition running low again, that familiar feeling of things starting to fall apart. Then the autumn rains come. The roads turn to rivers of mud. The trenches fill with brown water. Men sink up to their knees, their waists, struggling to move forward through muck that seems to have a mind of its own. Horses die by the hundreds, their hearts giving out trying to pull supply wagons through the impossible terrain. And the Germans keep fighting. Every mile costs more than the last. Every advance is met with a counterattack. The Austrians were broken, sure, but breaking Austria wasn't the same as winning the war. Germany is still standing, Germany is still strong, and Germany has decided that the Eastern Front matters again. By October, the offensive is over. Not officially. The orders still say to attack, but the attacks go nowhere. Men charge across the mud and die on barbed wire, and the lines stay exactly where they are. The great breakthrough has become a great stalemate. All that hope, all that momentum ground down to nothing in the autumn rain. The numbers come in. 500,000 Russian casualties, 500,000 men dead or wounded or missing. That's more than the population of most cities. That's entire generations erased. And for what? 100 miles of Austrian territory that they might lose again next spring? Mikhail sits in a trench somewhere near a town called Kovel and tries to make sense of it. They won, technically. Brusilov's offensive was the most successful Russian operation of the entire war. The history books will call it a triumph. They'll write about the millions of Austrian casualties, the territories captured, the empire brought to its knees. But it doesn't feel like a triumph. It feels like exhaustion, like the last gasp of a man who's been running for too long and can't run anymore. The army is spent. You can see it in men's faces, the way they move, the way they talk. Something has broken that can't be fixed. Pavel puts it into words one night, huddled under a makeshift shelter while the rain drums down around them. We gave everything, he says, everything we had, and it still wasn't enough. Mikhail doesn't answer. There's nothing to say. Romania, their new ally, is already in trouble. The Germans turned on them almost as soon as they entered the war. By December, Bucharest will fall. Another country conquered, another ally lost. The grand alliance that was supposed to crush the Central Powers keeps getting smaller. Winter comes again. The third winter of the war. Mikhail tries to remember what peace felt like. What it was like to sleep in a bed instead of a hole in the ground. What it was like to eat food that wasn't half rotten or full of weevils. What it was like to go a whole day without hearing artillery. He can't remember. Not really. Those memories feel like they belong to someone else, someone who died a long time ago. He writes to Katya, the same letter he always writes. I'm alive. I miss you. I hope everything is well at home. He doesn't tell her about the offensive or the casualties or the creeping despair that's settling over the army like a fog. What would be the point? Her letters have changed, though. Slowly, over the months, something different has crept into them. The bread is getting expensive, she writes. There are lines at the shops now. People are angry. There was trouble in Saratov last month. Soldiers came to restore order. Trouble. That's a word that can mean a lot of things. Mikhail folds the letter and puts it away. He takes out the drawing his son made what feels like 100 years ago. The paper is so worn now that it's nearly transparent. He can barely see the brown smudge that's supposed to be a horse. But he knows it's there. He's memorized every line, every mark, every place where the colours bled into each other. The rain keeps falling. Somewhere out there, beyond the trenches, beyond the mud and the wire and the bodies, there's a country called Russia. A country that's changing in ways Mikhail doesn't understand. Bread riots, protests, soldiers shooting at crowds. The war has been bleeding Russia dry for more than 2 years now, and the bleeding isn't stopping. Something is coming. Mikhail can feel it. Everyone can feel it. The officers don't talk about the war the way they used to. They talk about after. They talk about politics. They whisper names in the dark, names that would have gotten them arrested a year ago. Revolution. It's not a word anyone says out loud. Not yet. But it's there, hanging in the air, waiting. The guns are quiet tonight. Too muddy to fight, too wet to move. Everyone just waiting for something to happen. Mikhail closes his eyes and listens to the rain and thinks about home. His son will be 5 in February. 5 years old, walking and talking and asking questions. Probably asking where his father is. Why he's been gone so long, when he's coming back. Mikhail doesn't know when he's coming back. He's not sure anymore that he ever is. But he keeps the drawing in his pocket anyway. Keeps it close to his heart, where the icon of St. Nicholas is still sewn into the lining of his coat. 2 pieces of faith. 2 reasons to keep going. The rain falls, the darkness deepens. And somewhere in the distance, so far away it might be thunder or might be imagination, the guns begin to rumble again. The rumours about Rasputin have been circulating for years. Mikhail first heard the name back in 1915, whispered between soldiers who should have known better, than to gossip about the royal family. Grigory Rasputin, a holy man from Siberia, a mystic, a healer. The man who could stop the bleeding when the Tsar's only son, little Alexei, had his episodes. The boy had haemophilia. Everyone knew that, even if nobody was supposed to talk about it. A disease of the blood that made every cut dangerous, every bruise potentially fatal. The slightest bump could cause internal bleeding that wouldn't stop. The doctors couldn't help. The priests couldn't help. The best medical minds in Europe had been brought in and they just shook their heads. But somehow, this peasant from the middle of nowhere, this wandering holy man with wild eyes and a tangled beard, could lay his hands on the child and the bleeding would stop. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was hypnotism. Maybe it was just luck. Nobody knew. But the Tsarina believed it was a miracle, and that was all that mattered. So she loved him, trusted him, listened to him like he was the voice of God himself. And as the Tsar spent more and more time at the front, trying to personally command an army that was bleeding to death just like his son, the Tsarina listened to Rasputin more and more. She wrote him letters asking for advice. She invited him to the palace. She let him whisper in her ear about who should be appointed to which position, who could be trusted, who was an enemy. That's what the rumours said anyway. They also said other things, darker things, that Rasputin was sleeping with half the noble women in Petrograd, that he was drunk more often than sober, that he was appointing ministers and generals based on nothing more than whims and bribes, that he was, in effect, running the country while the Tsar played soldier and the empire burned. Mikhail didn't know what was true and what wasn't. He was a peasant from Saratov. What did he know about the games rich people played in palaces hundreds of miles away? But even he could see that something was wrong. The officers talked differently now. They drank more. They laughed at orders instead of following them. The old certainties were crumbling. Then, in December of 1916, Rasputin died. The story that reached the front was so strange that at first nobody believed it. A group of nobles had invited him to a palace for a late-night meeting. They'd fed him cakes laced with enough cyanide to kill 5 men. Rasputin ate them and asked for more. They'd poured him wine mixed with poison. He drank it and asked for vodka, so they shot him. He fell, and then he got back up. They shot him again, and again. They beat him with clubs until his skull cracked, and still, somehow, he kept moving, kept trying to crawl away. In the end, they wrapped him in a carpet and threw him into the frozen Neva River. When they found his body 2 days later, his lungs were full of water, meaning he was still alive when he went into the river, meaning he survived the poison, the bullets, the beating, only to finally drown under the ice. Good riddance, Pavel said when he heard the news. A lot of men said the same thing. Rasputin was gone. Maybe now things would get better. Maybe now the Tsar would wake up and see what was happening to his country. Things didn't get better. January passed, February began, and the letters from home got worse. Katya wrote about bread lines that stretched around entire blocks, about shops that were empty by noon, about prices that doubled every week, about people freezing in their homes because there was no coal, no wood, nothing to burn except furniture and books. She wrote about strikes, factory workers refusing to work, women marching in the streets, demanding food for their children, soldiers being called in to restore order, soldiers refusing to fire on the crowds. And then, in the last week of February, the letters stopped coming entirely. Mikhail didn't know what was happening. None of them did. The officers knew something. You could see it in their faces, but they weren't talking. The telegraph lines were silent. The supply trains weren't running. It was like someone had cut the army off from the rest of the country and left them floating in the void. The truth came in pieces over the next few days. There had been riots in Petrograd. Not just strikes, not just protests. Riots. The whole city in flames. Workers and soldiers fighting together against the police, against the army units still loyal to the Tsar, against anyone who tried to stop them. The Duma, the parliament that the Tsar had always ignored, had taken control of the government. And the Tsar himself? The Tsar had abdicated. Mikhail heard that news on a cold morning in early March, standing in a field somewhere in what used to be Austria, surrounded by men who looked as stunned as he felt. An officer read the announcement from a piece of paper, his voice shaking. The Tsar had given up, just like that. Signed a piece of paper and walked away from everything. 300 years of Romanov rule ended with a signature in a railway car. No one cheered. No one wept. They just stood there, frozen, trying to understand what it meant. Mikhail had been raised to believe the Tsar was like a father. That's what the priests always said. The Tsar was the father of all Russians, appointed by God to guide and protect them. You didn't question the Tsar any more than you'd question the sun rising. He was just there, eternal, unchanging, and now he was gone. What happens now? Someone asked. It might have been Pavel. It might have been Mikhail himself. He couldn't remember later. The question hung in the cold air, unanswered, unanswerable. Nobody knew. The officers said a provisional government had taken over. Politicians, lawyers, educated men from the cities who were going to make Russia a democracy. There would be elections. There would be reforms. There would be freedom. And the war? The war would continue. That's what the provisional government said. Russia had made promises to France and Britain. Russia would keep those promises. The army would keep fighting. The soldiers would keep dying. Nothing would change except the flag they were dying for. Mikhail felt something shift inside him when he heard that. something cold and hard settling into place. All those men at Lake Naroch, all those men in the Brusilov offensive, all those men frozen in trenches and rotting in no man's land. And for what? So that politicians could take over from the Tsar and keep sending them to die? He wasn't the only one who felt it. The army started to change, slowly at first, then faster. Soldiers' committees formed in every regiment, elected bodies that claimed to speak for the men, that demanded a say in how things were run. Officers who tried to give orders found themselves ignored. Officers who tried to enforce discipline found themselves alone, surrounded by men who no longer feared them. One morning, Mikhail watched a lieutenant try to arrest a soldier for refusing to dig a trench. The soldier just laughed. 24 men stepped forward and stood between him and the officer. "The war is over for us," someone said. "We're going home." The lieutenant reached for his pistol. He never got it out of the holster. They were on him in seconds. Mikhail turned away before it was finished, but he heard the sounds, the thuds, the screaming. When he looked back, the lieutenant was lying in the mud, and the men were walking away like nothing had happened. It wasn't the last time. Across the Eastern Front, officers were being attacked, beaten, shot, thrown from trains. The men who had spent 3 years being ordered to die were finally deciding that they'd had enough, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. Pavel came to Mikhail one night, shaking. "They killed Captain Sorokin," he said. "The men from 3rd Company. They said he was a traitor. They said he was going to make them attack again. Captain Sorokin, a decent man, one of the few officers who actually cared about his soldiers, dead because someone decided he was the enemy." "What do we do?" Pavel asked. "Mikhail, what the hell do we do?" Mikhail didn't have an answer. The regiment was dissolving around them. Men were deserting in groups of 10, 20, 50 at a time, just walking away from the trenches and heading east toward home. They didn't sneak away at night like deserters used to. They left in broad daylight, rifles on their shoulders, talking and laughing like they were going on holiday. What was anyone going to do? Shoot them? There weren't enough bullets, and even if there were, the men doing the shooting might decide to join them instead. The provisional government sent orders to stop them. The orders were ignored. They sent military police. The military police were shot or simply absorbed into the tide of men going the other way. They sent patriotic speeches about duty and honour and the motherland. The men listened politely and kept walking. Mikhail watched a column of deserters pass by one afternoon. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching down the road as far as he could see. They didn't look like criminals. They didn't look ashamed. They looked tired, exhausted, empty. Men who had given everything they had and couldn't give any more. One of them stopped and looked at Mikhail. A young soldier, maybe 20 years old, with hollow cheeks and ancient eyes. "Come with us, brother," he said. "The war is over. Go home to your family." Mikhail didn't answer. The young man shrugged and kept walking. Spring came. The snow melted. The roads turned to mud again. And still the provisional government insisted that Russia would keep fighting. A new offensive was planned. A great push that would prove to the world that revolutionary Russia was still strong, still committed, still willing to sacrifice. Nobody believed it. The Germans knew what was happening. They could see the Russian positions emptying out. They could hear the arguments and the gunshots. They started sending men across no man's land, not to attack, but to talk, to hand out pamphlets, to share cigarettes and bread, to tell the Russian soldiers that the war was a lie, that their real enemies were the rich men in Petrograd and Moscow and London, that they should go home and take what was rightfully theirs. The first time it happened near Mikhail's trench, he couldn't believe it. German soldiers, the same Germans who had been trying to kill him for 3 years, walking across the mud with their hands up, smiling, calling out in broken Russian. "Comrades," they shouted, "no more war, go home." Some of the Russian soldiers shot at them, old habits, but most just watched, too confused to react. And then someone climbed out of the trench and walked toward the Germans, and then another, and then a dozen more, and soon there were Russian and German soldiers standing together in no man's land, trading tobacco and showing each other photographs of their families. Some of those Germans were communists, revolutionaries. They talked about a man named Lenin who was coming back to Russia, a man who would end the war and give the land to the peasants and make everything right. They talked about a world where workers ruled and rich men served. They talked about a future that sounded like a fairy tale. Mikhail didn't know what to believe anymore. He'd been a loyal soldier for almost 3 years. He'd followed orders. He'd charged into machine gun fire. He'd watched his friends die and kept going because that's what you did. Because Russia needed him. Because the Tsar needed him. But the Tsar was gone now, and Russia was tearing itself apart. He thought about Katya, about Pyotr, about the little farm in Kamenka where he'd grown up, where his father had grown up, where his son should have been growing up instead of wondering if his father was ever coming home. He took out the drawing, looked at it for a long time. The horse was almost invisible now, just a brown shadow on paper that was falling apart. But Mikhail could still see it, could still remember the day his son made it, tongue sticking out in concentration, so proud of what he'd created. "I'm coming home," Mikhail whispered. "I'm coming home." He didn't know when. He didn't know how. The provisional government was planning its offensive. The Germans were planning theirs. Somewhere in Petrograd, men in suits were arguing about the future of a country that was already slipping through their fingers. But none of that mattered anymore. Mikhail Volkov was done fighting. He was done watching men die for reasons no one could explain. Done taking orders from people who had never seen a trench, never smelled the rot of no man's land, never held a friend while he bled out in the mud. He was going home, one way or another. The spring nights were getting shorter. The darkness didn't last as long anymore. Somewhere in the distance an owl called out, hunting in the last hours before dawn. Pavel was asleep nearby, finally, his breathing slow and even. One of the few men Mikhail still trusted, one of the few who hadn't lost himself entirely to the madness. Tomorrow there would be more chaos, more arguments, more violence probably. The officers who remained were trying to hold things together, but you could see they'd already given up. They were just going through the motions, waiting for the end. Mikhail closed his eyes. He dreamed of wheat fields golden in the summer sun, of Katya's laugh, of a small boy running toward him with arms outstretched, shouting a word he hadn't heard in 3 years. "Papa, Papa, you're home." The dream felt more real than anything else, more real than the war, more real than the trenches and the guns and the bodies. He held on to it as long as he could. And when morning came, grey and cold and full of uncertainty, Mikhail got up and kept going. Because that's what you did. Because somewhere, far to the east, his family was waiting, and nothing else mattered anymore. Nothing at all. July 1917. The provisional government launches its offensive. They call it the Kerensky Offensive, after Alexander Kerensky, the man who's taken charge of this shambling wreck of a government. He believes that one great victory will restore the army's morale, that Russian soldiers will remember who they are and what they're fighting for, that the revolution can be saved on the battlefield. He's wrong. Mikhail watches the attack from a reserve position. His regiment isn't part of the first wave. Not enough men left. Not enough men willing to go. They sit in trenches that smell like rot and despair and watch other soldiers advance across the same ground that's been fought over a dozen times before. The first day goes well. The Russians push forward. The Germans fall back. For a few hours it almost looks like the old days, like the Brusilov offensive before everything went wrong. Then the Germans counterattack. It's not even a big counterattack. A few divisions. Nothing compared to what they threw at the Russians in 1915. But it doesn't matter. The Russian army breaks, not bends, breaks. Entire regiments drop their weapons and run. Officers try to rally them and get trampled. Units that held together through 3 years of hell simply dissolve. Men scattering in every direction, caring about nothing except getting away. Mikhail runs too. There's no shame in it anymore. No point pretending. The war is over. It's been over for months, really. This is just the final proof. The Russian army doesn't exist anymore. There's just 1 million men in uniform who want to go home. The retreat doesn't stop. The Germans advance almost without resistance, taking back in days what the Russians spent years and millions of lives to capture. Riga falls, then more cities. The front collapses so completely that it stops being a front at all. Just chaos. Just men moving in every direction, some toward the enemy, most away from it. Autumn comes. Mikhail is somewhere east of the old front lines, moving with a group of soldiers who've given up any pretense of military order. They're not a unit anymore. They're just men walking in the same direction. Sometimes they find food, sometimes they don't. They sleep in barns, in ditches, in the open air. They avoid anyone who looks like an officer or a military policeman. And then, in October, everything changes again. The Bolsheviks seize power. Mikhail hears about it from a man who claims to have been in Petrograd when it happened. The provisional government overthrown, Kerensky fled. A new government in charge, led by Lenin and his communists, a government that's promising something the provisional government never would. Peace. That's the word that spreads through the remnants of the army like fire through dry grass. Peace. The Bolsheviks are going to end the war. They're going to negotiate with the Germans and bring the soldiers home. No more fighting, no more dying. Peace. Mikhail doesn't care about communism, doesn't care about Lenin or Trotsky or any of the names people keep throwing around. He cares about one thing: going home. The negotiations drag on through November, December. The Germans demand territory, massive amounts of it. Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Ukraine, land that Russian soldiers died for, land that's soaked in Russian blood. The Bolsheviks resist at first. Trotsky tries to stall, hoping that revolution will spread to Germany too, that the German workers will rise up and the whole war will just end on its own. It doesn't happen. The Germans lose patience. They start advancing again, meeting almost no resistance. Finally, in March of 1918, the treaty is signed. Brest-Litovsk. Russia gives up everything. A third of its population, half its industry, most of its coal and iron. The price for peace is the dismemberment of the empire. 3 years of war, 2 million dead, and Russia ends up worse off than when it started. But the fighting stops. That's all Mikhail cares about. The fighting stops. On December 16th, 1917, the guns finally fall silent on the Eastern Front. After 3 years, 4 months, and countless lives, it's over. He starts walking east. The journey home takes weeks. The railroads are chaos. Trains run when they feel like it, stop where they want to, get commandeered by whoever has the most guns. Stations are packed with men trying to get somewhere, anywhere. Fights break out over seats, over bread, over nothing at all. Mikhail rides when he can, clinging to the outside of freight cars, packed into compartments so crowded he can barely breathe. Mostly he walks, through villages that have been stripped bare by war and revolution, past fields that haven't been planted because there's no one left to plant them, through forests where deserters hide and bandits wait for easy prey. He learns to sleep with one eye open, learns to trust no one, learns to make himself invisible when armed men pass by. He sees things on that journey he'll never talk about. Bodies by the roadside that no one has buried. Villages burned to the ground. Men hanging from trees with signs around their necks. Traitor or bourgeois or enemy of the people. The revolution is eating its own children, and Mikhail wants no part of it. He just wants to go home. Civil war is coming. Everyone knows it. The Bolsheviks have enemies everywhere. Generals who want to restore the Tsar. Politicians who want democracy. Foreign powers who want to strangle communism in its cradle. Russia has traded one war for another, and this one might be even worse. But that's not Mikhail's war. Not anymore. He keeps walking. The snow falls. The roads freeze. His boots wear through and he wraps his feet in rags just like he did in the trenches. He's hungry more often than not. Cold all the time. But he keeps going. One foot in front of the other. East. Always east. He passes through Saratov in late January. The city he remembers from before the war is gone. The streets are full of refugees, beggars, men in tattered uniforms begging for bread. Shops are boarded up. Windows are broken. Someone has painted slogans on the walls. Death to the bourgeoisie. All power to the Soviets. Long live the revolution. Mikhail doesn't stop. Can't stop. He's too close now. 2 more days of walking. Through countryside that's starting to look familiar. Past landmarks he remembers from his childhood. A crooked tree by the river. A stone wall that's been there for 100 years. The shape of the hills against the grey winter sky. And then, on a cold afternoon in early February, he sees it. Kamenka. The village looks smaller than he remembers, shabbier. Some of the houses are empty, their owners dead or fled or taken by the war that took so many. The church has a hole in its roof that no one's bothered to fix. The inn where he used to drink with his friends is boarded up. The smithy is cold and silent, but it's still there, still standing, still home. Mikhail stands at the edge of the village for a long moment, just looking. He's imagined this so many times. In the trenches, in the hospitals, on the long cold nights when death seemed closer than life. He imagined walking down this road and seeing these houses and knowing that he'd made it. That against all odds, against all reason, he'd survived. Now that it's real, he almost can't believe it. He walks down the main street, slowly, each step deliberate. People stare at him from doorways and windows. Some of them recognize him, some of them don't. An old woman crosses herself when she sees him, like she's looking at a ghost. Maybe she is. So many men left this village, so few came back. Mikhail is not the same man who left here almost 4 years ago. That man was young and strong and believed in things. That man had never seen what a shell does to a human body, had never watched a friend drown in mud, had never learned that survival is just luck, nothing more, and luck runs out eventually for everyone. This man is thin and weathered and has eyes that have seen too much. The house is at the end of the street, the same house where he was born, the same house where his father was born. A thin curl of smoke rises from the chimney. Someone is home. Mikhail stops at the gate. His heart is pounding. After everything he's survived, after all the bullets and the gas and the cold, he's terrified now. Terrified of what he might find. Terrified of what he might not find. The door opens. Katya stands there, older than he remembers, thinner, with new lines around her eyes that weren't there before. She's wearing a dress he doesn't recognize. Her hair is pulled back in a simple braid. She's the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. For a long moment neither of them moves. Neither of them speaks. The world has stopped. The wind has stopped. Everything has stopped except the two of them, standing 10 feet apart, separated by 4 years and 1,000,000 miles and more death than anyone should ever have to see. Then Katya makes a sound, a small sound, like something breaking and healing at the same time. She runs to him. He catches her, holds her, buries his face in her hair and breathes in the smell of her, wood smoke and bread and something else. Something that's just her, just home. She's crying. He's crying too, though he doesn't realize it until he feels the tears freezing on his cheeks. "You came back," she whispers. "You came back." "I promised," he says. His voice is rough. He hasn't spoken much in weeks. "I promised I would." And then there's another voice, small and high and uncertain. "Mama?" Mikhail looks up. A boy is standing in the doorway, 5 years old, dark hair like his mother, eyes like his father, wearing a coat that's too big for him, and boots that have been patched so many times they're more patched than boot. Pyotr, his son, the boy he left when he was barely more than a baby, the boy who drew him a picture of a horse on the day he went away, the boy he's been carrying in his heart for 4 years, across battlefields and through trenches and past the gates of hell itself. Pyotr looks at him, studies him, trying to match this stranger to the fading memory of a father who left a long time ago. Mikhail kneels down. His knees ache. His back aches. Everything aches. But he kneels anyway, bringing himself down to the boy's level. "Pyotr," he says, "do you remember me?" The boy doesn't answer right away. He takes a step forward, then another. His eyes are serious, thoughtful, weighing this stranger who's come to his home. Then he nods. "Your papa," he says. "Mama showed me the picture." Mikhail reaches into his coat, into the pocket where he's kept it for 4 years. Through battles and retreats and freezing nights and desperate marches, he pulls out the drawing. The paper is so worn it's almost falling apart. The brown horse is barely visible anymore, just a ghost of colour on fragile paper. "You made this for me," he says. "Do you remember?" Pyotr's eyes go wide. "You kept it," he says, wonder in his voice. A child's wonder at discovering that something he made matters, that something he did travelled far away and came back again. "Every day," Mikhail says. "I looked at it every day. It helped me remember what I was coming home to." Pyotr steps forward, slowly at first, then faster, and then he's in Mikhail's arms, small and warm and real, and Mikhail is holding his son for the first time in 4 years, and the war is over, finally over, truly over. They go inside. The house is smaller than he remembers, poorer, but it's warm, and there's food on the table, and his family is here, and that's all that matters. That's everything that matters. That night, after Pyotr has fallen asleep, Mikhail sits by the fire with Katya. They don't talk much. There's too much to say, and no words that can say it. They just sit together, her hand in his, watching the flames. "It was bad," she says finally. "Here, while you were gone. I know. People died. From hunger, from the influenza, from the fighting after the revolution. I know." She looks at him. "Was it worse there?" Mikhail thinks about Tannenberg, about Lake Naroch, about the men frozen in the wire and the boys with no rifles and the walking dead at Osoves, about Dmitri dying of dysentery and Pavel keeping him sane and all the others, so many others, who didn't make it home. "Yes," he says, "it was worse." She squeezes his hand, doesn't ask for details, knows that some things can't be spoken, some things can only be carried quietly until time wears them smooth enough to bear. The fire crackles, the wind whispers against the windows. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once and then falls silent. Mikhail closes his eyes. He's home, after everything, after all of it. He's home. The war is over. The empire is gone. The world he knew has been swept away, and something new is rising in its place, something uncertain and dangerous and impossible to predict. Civil war is coming. Famine is coming. Decades of struggle are coming. Hardships that will make the war look simple by comparison. But right now, in this moment, none of that matters. Right now, there's just a fire burning low in a small house in a village called Kamenka. A woman sleeping with her head on his shoulder. A boy dreaming in the next room, safe and warm and loved. Right now, there's just peace. Mikhail breathes out, long and slow, letting go of something he's been carrying for 4 years, letting go of the weight and the fear and the constant readiness for death. He's survived. 2 million Russians didn't. The Empire didn't. The Old World didn't. But Mikhail Volkov, peasant farmer from Kamenka, he survived. And maybe that's enough. Maybe survival is its own kind of victory, the only kind that really matters. The fire dims, the shadows deepen, the house grows quiet, and Mikhail Volkov, finally home, finally safe, finally at peace, closes his eyes and sleeps. Real sleep, deep sleep, the sleep of a man who has walked through fire and come out the other side. Dream of wheat fields if you can. Dream of summer. Dream of a world where the guns are silent and the ones you love are near and everything, somehow, is going to be okay. The story is over. Rest now. Sleep well.